It has been another week of action and glimpses into the near future. Ship 37 ran through all of this over just a few days and wow, we've got all this to dive into. Breaking news with SpaceX releasing a ton of info on Flights 9, 10 and the Ship 36 explosion. We've got loads to see around the Florida sites, a number of massive rockets jumping off pads all over the place and much more. Thanks for joining me for yet another crazy week.
Okay, Neil, we can see you coming down the ladder now.
Hey, Marcus House with you here, and Starship 37 is back for more action as SpaceX prepares for Flight 10, even though they completed what seemed to be a successful 6-engine static fire. As we covered it last week, they appeared to need more testing after a vacuum engine was replaced and the launch mount adapter stand was placed back into the Pad 1 launch mount. As expected, on Monday, Ship 37 was leaving Megabay 2 once more. Because of the new Gigabay site being worked on, the original main entrance is currently blocked off, so they need to make their way through the Sanchez area before they can come out on the highway. A beautiful clear day as Ship 37 made its way back to the launch site and was rolled right between the tower arms so that the team on the ground could get back to work attaching the ship interface plate back on. Again, this simply allows them to connect up the lines of the temporary quick disconnect structure on the mount. Absolutely love the view captured by Shaun of this lift. Thanks so much for being subscribed here to watch what we are capturing and talking about each week. Hopefully the next flight is going to break some new milestones after the issues that we've seen with all of the Block 2 ships this year. We've certainly needed you more than ever while all this work has been going on, so we appreciate you. No issues at all with this lift, and obviously this was placed on that special adapter stand not even an hour later. Now, if we zoom in on this one, thanks to Starship Gazer, we can see that SpaceX had this time already removed the vacuum engine stiffeners. They had these on for the static fires previously, so this is intriguing, right? Those stiffeners help support the long vacuum engine nozzles for ground firing so that they can't shake themselves apart, but with them now taken off, we were assuming that they were not going to do a static fire after all. Instead, we had our money on them doing just a spin prime test, essentially just a spin up of the turbo pumps and associated systems in the engines themselves, but with no actual ignition. On Tuesday, all 4 flaps on Ship 37 were going through the actuation tests, and the detonation suppression system under the launch mount was tested to ensure everything was good to go. As we got later into the afternoon, the road was closed and propellant started loading. Now, sadly, it was soon being detanked again without that action, so after the abort, we looked to be rescheduled for Wednesday. Sure enough, on Wednesday morning there was that spin prime test, and it looked like they did that with all 6 engines. So with that done, they seemed to have everything needed now and could get back to preparing for the fully stacked Starship to take the stand. Ship 37 was manually detached and lifted back off. Now, many have asked why they didn't static fire the engine again. Remember that the engines are fired on a test stand before being integrated into the vehicle anyway, so it isn't like the replaced vacuum Raptor engine has never been fired before. In this case, I suspect SpaceX just didn't want to risk a full static fire again just for the sake of the one vacuum engine. On Thursday, that was already rolling back to the production site to prepare for launch, and there it is back in Megabay 2 once again. The crane has since hooked up to that static fire adapter stand and lifted it back out, so with that out of the way, it has already been moved and returned to the Sanchez area. They really don't mess around because they immediately got to work reinstalling all 20 clamps to support the full stack for Flight 10, so here we go. Now, before moving over to the production site, some neat new updates just across the road. Here we are closely watching the ground preparation for the new air separation unit, and it's speeding along with formwork already being assembled along the edge of the site. Trucks are quickly piling up dirt in the middle, which is a technique used to initially compress the ground below so that future heavy equipment and buildings start off with a better support. If you have been following the site development at Starbase for many years now, you may recall SpaceX using this same idea way back in 2018, building this mountain of dirt over what would soon be known as the suborbital sites, now of course evolved into Pad 2 today. Okay, so we've got lots of fun stuff at the production site this week. In the Star Factory, this tank section has an interesting label indicating it is the Booster 19 Aft section number 6. Exciting because this is the first section that we've seen for Booster 19. This is the second Block 3 booster confirmed to be in production, along with Booster 18 already being assembled in Mega Bay 1. I'm just so excited for the first one of these to be rolled out. SpaceX published these views just a few days ago, talking about some of the incredible upgrades to the grid fins and whatnot. Check these out, they are absolutely massive. A human for scale there too, just to put the size into some sort of perspective. This is the very first grid fin ready to be installed on the next generation Super Heavy Block 3. They have been redesigned to be 50% larger and are even stronger now. As we found out in the last presentation, they are having only 3 of these spread at 90-degree angles, with one side without a grid fin at all. SpaceX said here that this is going to allow control while also descending at higher angles of attack. You can imagine this grid fin here providing a lot more drag and helping to tilt the booster upwards. It's going to be a wondrous thing to see. The other great thing is that the 2 grid fins double as the catch points as well. You can see here the catch locations are simply incorporated into the fin for catching and, of course, lifting by the tower arms. The fins themselves are obviously now designed in to be lower on the vehicle than before, and this means that when hot staging occurs, they're not getting smashed as directly by all of the heat and pressure from the upper stage Starship exhaust. Because of this repositioning, however, the actuators and shaft have been placed inside the booster's methane tank. Presumably there are housings built in, because they certainly wouldn't want those mechanisms swimming directly in the liquid methane. So what about some updates for the upper stage Starship for Block 3 as well? Well, this is quite interesting. 8 Block 3 nose cones have been spotted in the Star Factory so far. The one with the ablative material installed is Ship 39, the first Block 3 ship, and its successors are in varying levels of completion, as you can see here. With the high launch frequency that SpaceX is hoping for, as well as the vast number of ships needed to support future missions, it's a great sign that they're full steam ahead on ship production. Now in Mega Bay 2, previously SpaceX has had just the 3 full workstations inside. Those have been lined up at the back of the bay, and they also have more makeshift stands on the left and right sides in the front half, but now it seems they're also wanting these to turn into full workstations too. Here was the top ring of a new stand on the right side of the bay being lifted in on Tuesday, as well as the floor segment. That can be moved up and down with engines to assist installation. Now, I suspect at some point we'll see them install another one of these full stands on the left side of the bay as well. Work on the final Block 2 ship, number 38, is having engine work done now too, we suspect. On Thursday morning, a sea-level engine was moved into the Star Factory, and later in the afternoon, a vacuum and sea-level engine was sent into Mega Bay 2. Now, the breaking news, of course, is that SpaceX released a ton of information on Flight 9, the upcoming Flight 10, as well as giving us a bunch more detail on Ship 36's testing incident. In the Flight 9 report, they believe that the most likely reason Booster 14 exploded shortly after the landing burn ignition was indeed due to the deliberately high angle of attack. This looks to have led to higher than predicted forces on the methane transfer tube inside, which led to its structural failure. With the methane and oxygen mixing, an explosion was guaranteed. So to fix this for the final 2 Block 2 flights, they'll use a lower angle of attack again. Moving forward, we've already seen how beefed up the Block 3 transfer tube is, so that shouldn't be an issue for those future vehicles. On the ship side of Flight 9, SpaceX says here that they detected increased methane levels in the nose cone about 3 minutes into the ascent burn. About 5 minutes in, the main fuel tank pressure had rapidly decreased while pressure simultaneously increased in the nose cone. Despite the concern of the methane tank not having enough back pressure to properly feed the engines, they say that Starship's systems were still able to compensate and complete the ascent burn. Now, following engine cutoff, there is a planned venting from the nose cone, which for this ship would have now been much stronger than normal with the increased pressure behind it. This then led to the attitude issues with the ship tumbling, which continued until the venting was disabled by fault systems. It also led to the ship itself choosing to skip the following payload deploy test and the in-space burn. Even without the attitude issue though, they say that the door still wouldn't have opened anyway because the pressure was simply too high. Interestingly, Ship 35 was able to decrease the attitude error by using onboard reaction control thrusters, but it was still doomed at this point as the nose cone venting would eventually kick back in as planned. Roughly 40 seconds after nose cone vents were re-enabled, onboard cameras showed liquid methane entering the nose cone. The most probable root cause of that failure was what they call the main fuel tank pressurization system diffuser. That, we believe, should be this autogenous pressurization manifold on the forward dome that evenly spreads out gaseous methane back into the methane tank. Thanks to Chameleon Circuit working with us to show this, we can see that right here. Now, to fix this for future flights, it has been redesigned to decrease the strain on the structure, and it's now undergone much more rigorous qualification testing. It has run for more than 10 times the expected service life now with no damage. Finally, thanks to the issues already experienced, SpaceX said that the ship was programmed to vent all remaining propellant so that the eventual failure on re-entry wouldn't be as energetic. Communication was lost about 59 kilometers in altitude with no flight termination system being activated. Now, the information released on Ship 36 is also intriguing. Here, they show that the most probable root cause for the explosion was undetectable or underscreened damage to a COPV in the payload bay. To address this issue, these pressure vessels on upcoming flights will operate at a reduced pressure with additional inspections and tests prior to loading reactive propellant on the vehicle. Various other checks are being implemented, such as new evaluation methods to detect damage and covers used during integration that protect and help highlight COPV damage. Anyway, with all these solutions, we hope to be heading into a beautifully successful flight of a Block 2 ship on Flight 10. Speaking of, here is SpaceX's info dump on that too. Before we dive into that though, a huge thanks to Delete Me for sponsoring today's video and making what we do here possible with the team. These days, it is so easy for you to end up with your personal information out there on the internet for the taking. You can be doing everything right, and some data breach may expose information of yours that may have seemed secure with some legitimate company or agency. Now, your name, address, phone number, even your family connections may be out there. That may not seem problematic until you realise that this is all rapidly scooped up by data brokers and sold to the highest bidder. It's shady, it's a multi-billion-dollar industry, and one that you've probably never even heard of. That's how those creepy, accurate robocalls, scam texts, and phishing emails find you. All it takes is the correct combination of leaked details and you're suddenly in the crosshairs. The good news is that you can start fighting back. Delete Me is the service that I use to clean up a lot of this data. They find out where your information is exposed across hundreds of data broker sites and submit demands to get it removed. Not just once either, they systematically scan and remove new threats as they pop up. I mean, if I understood this industry well enough, it might be possible for me to submit requests myself to remove some of it, but with hundreds of data broker sites out there, you really need an expert in the field to get stuck into it. Delete Me just handles it all behind the scenes, and they've even now got a way to help you protect your entire family under the one account. You can set it all up and manage it for them, or even give them access via their own secure login and privacy settings. It's all managed from a clean, simple dashboard. So yeah, give it a try using my link joindeleteme.com/Marcus for a 20% discount on US consumer plans. The URL is right there in the description for international plans too. Thank you, Delete Me. Alright, so check out all of this juicy information about Starship Flight 10. The official target date is currently Sunday, August 24th, with the launch window opening at 6:30 PM Central Time. The SpaceX website now automatically shows their T0 in your local time, so check it out to see what time that will be for you. Flight 10 is kind of a repeat of Flight 9 again in terms of the planned objectives. Booster 16 will attempt several flight experiments to gather real-world performance data on future flight profiles and, as they say, off-nominal scenarios. Just like last time, to safely perform these experiments, yes, the booster will not return to the launch site for a catch, and it'll instead attempt this over the Gulf. This makes sense, of course. They've caught these boosters 3 times now, so they've proven that they can do it. At this point, they likely want to gather as much stress data as they can for the Block 3 booster is coming. Following stage separation, the booster will once again flip in that controlled direction, and during its landing burn, one of the 3 center engines will be intentionally disabled to test its ability to use a backup engine from the middle ring of 10 to complete the burn. For the transition to the center ring of 3 engines, only 2 of those will remain active to initiate the hover, and they will shut off and drop it into the ocean. Now for the upper stage Starship, once again they will attempt to deploy 8 Starlink simulators during the coast phase, followed by a Raptor relight. Just like the last flights, the ship has a significant number of tiles removed to stress test vulnerable areas across the vehicle during re-entry. Included, there are multiple experimental metallic tile options on the vehicle, including one with active cooling. Along with this, the thermal and structural performance of the catch fittings on the side of the ship will hopefully be tested this time. These have smoothed and tapered edges to address hotspots observed during Flight 6, so they hope to see how these perform, and they obviously want to gather data on the flaps at max Q during re-entry. So yeah, in a little over a week, we hope to be back again watching that beast fly. Okay, so we've got some great insights to talk about at Mazzi's. From above, thanks to RGV aerial photography, this empty stand is where Ship 38 has recently completed its cryogenic proof testing. That was the last Block 2 ship to require that testing, and Ship 39, believed to be the first of the updated Block 3 design, should be next up here. Due to that being different in a number of ways, we expect that the stand is going to have a fairly substantial reconfiguration effort going on, especially to support the new ship quick disconnect interface. Over here, you can see that they've been digging up even more concrete around the methane tank farm, and we're waiting to see if they're going to place a bunch of new cryogenic piping above the ground like the site has been previously, or keep running the lines below ground like they've done on the oxygen side. Speaking of that side, actually, we can already see that the 2 spare subcoolers salvaged from the old methane farm have now been lifted into place here. With double the cooling capacity coming for future vehicles, those cryo tests should be even faster to run through. The new electrical bunker has the roof in the process of being completed, with the rebar clearly visible there. You may already notice workers pulling conduit lines through the base heading towards the methane farm. They seem to be digging conduit lines through to the edge of the site, so SpaceX may be rerouting some of the other existing lines to this new bunker. Now, just revisiting that Booster 13 recovered aft once more, I think this has been a bit of a recent hobby of Shaun's, tracking it every few days. It turns out that documenting the scrapping process has been giving us loads of juicy views. This removed gimbaling Raptor has been chopped right out since we last looked. The lines have just been cut right through to get it out of there. Who knows what insights SpaceX is trying to gather on these engines? Who knows, simply researching how they've held up at the bottom of the ocean may be quite useful for the next generation upgrades. Now, it is well past time that we revisited all the Starship work going on at Florida, and thanks to Greg Scott this week, we can do exactly that. Starting off at the Roberts Road facility, we can see that the assembly work has started on a brand new tower module here. With the 2 towers at Starbase fully stacked, as well as the one at Launch Complex 39A, this will be the first module assembled for a 4th tower. There are a number of possibilities for where this tower may end up. The recent draft environmental impact statement that was released by the FAA shows that there will still be a separate catch tower planned for 39A, so it could be the start of that 2nd Starship tower. Speaking of that site, here you can see the flame deflector out in the open, parked right near the Falcon integration facility. Great minds think alike, because NSF also took the opportunity to fly in the clear weather. Max picked up another neat angle on the 2 halves of that flame deflector bucket, so yeah, it's all looking very similar to the one at Pad 2 in Texas, but given the distance, it's a little tricky to see any subtle differences. As you may know, the flight restrictions out here are very strict, so we can only get in so close. Luckily, during the Crew 11 launch, we got a pretty good view of the flame trench progress from the Falcon Tower. Well, until the Falcon 9 blocked the view. At this point, we could still see that they were missing some wall segments and the gantry construction on this side, so it'll likely still be quite a while until we see the flame bucket installed. You may remember from the Pad 2 installation that these ramp parts go back to back in the trench and are connected with a ridge part that's placed on top. Now, getting back to the new launch tower, it could also be heading to Space Launch Complex 37, as there are at least 2 towers planned there as well. Nearby, we can see plenty of pillar segments laying around for other tower modules to kick off, so we'll see a whole set constructed here before we know it. Moving over here, to go with it, you'll see a nice new pair of tower arms coming together as well. If you look super closely, you'll notice that unlike the previous sets of arms initially constructed, these ones have reinforcements already installed. Up here under the tent, you can see the ship quick disconnect arm previously seen on site is a little different. This is what it was like back at the end of June, whereas now you can see that they've been slicing it up in places, presumably to upgrade it to the latest design to match what we see at Pad 2 in Texas. Just north of Hangar X, we can see the big changes going on around the Giga Bay Foundation. Since the last flyover, you can clearly see all this outside framework has been built up and filled with rebar ready for pouring. The many areas covered in white sheeting would be helping to keep moisture at the recommended levels to ensure that it all cures at the required time. It may not seem like this is making speedy progress, but all this foundation work takes a long time to prepare and cure before other steps can be made. Once the foundation work is all finished though, the Giga Bay itself is going to rise fast. Of course, Greg also took the opportunity to snap some images around Blue Origin's facilities. In particular, a great view of this aft section, presumably for New Glenn's upcoming second flight. Posted a few days later, here was the aft module activation test. Hydrogen peroxide powers the hydraulics, and they've kicked off a shortened mission simulation here. With that done, they are now going to mate that module to the rest of the first stage and then install the 7 BE4 engines. It was previously estimated that this mission would be setting off sometime this month, but we haven't heard much on that schedule lately, so I doubt we're going to see it until at least September. As a reminder, this is going to be launching the Escapade mission with the dual spacecraft destined for Mars. As we can see, Blue Origin's mass simulator was right there on the launch pad as they get ready for the mission. Do remember to give Greg a follow there because he's often posting views like this. Now, we've had lots of exciting launch action this week. Vulcan was rolling out to the pad on Monday for its first mission of the year with USSF-106, and it's also its first national security mission for the US Space Force. It roared off the pad on Tuesday evening with 4 solid rocket boosters in action. This is a more powerful configuration of the Vulcan rocket than with the first 2 flights, which had just the 2 solid rocket boosters attached. Given that this was the first Vulcan to fly since last October, many have been asking why they haven't yet accelerated the launch frequency. Well, coincidentally, Tori Bruno, ULA's CEO, during an Ask Me Everything event early in the week, said that they are planning to up the launch cadence to 2 launches per month by the end of the year. This will allow them to reach their target of 9 Vulcan launches in 2025, and they then hope to continue that frequency into 2026. The reason for the delay he has confirmed as being related to the solid rocket booster's nozzle anomaly in the second flight last year. That has taken a lot of investigation, and of course, we were very happy to see that no such issue in this flight occurred. At 1 minute and 40 seconds, we watched those SRBs separate cleanly away. In fact, the entire flight looked textbook. We were largely just watching the ascent graphic once the Vulcan had left the view of the ground cameras, but we did jump back to this camera view of stage separation and a great view of the 2 RL-10s lighting up. At this 5-minute mark, it is already travelling at 4.6 kilometers per second. Now that is quick compared to, say, Falcon 9, where at the same time, the second stage is moving along at about 3.1 kilometers per second. With Vulcan, this all varies, obviously, depending on the ascent profile, but it's interesting to compare. The staging is obviously very different too. Falcon 9's booster cutoff is at only 2.5 minutes, so Vulcan's first stage keeps kicking along for almost twice the time. Of course, that also means that the core stage is moving a lot faster, so if ULA does eventually implement that smart reuse, that aft engine block is going to be entering the atmosphere without an entry burn and at a much higher energy. I sure do hope that they try though, because with the expense of Vulcan, if they don't try to reduce the flight costs somehow, it isn't going to matter how beautifully efficient and well designed it is. It's just not going to compete too well on cost. Now, of course, given this was a secretive payload, the live coverage was cut just after stage separation, so that was all we got to see from this mission. Along with that, and with a few delays due to weather, the clock was finally ticking again for the new Kuiper launch. Yes, the second ever Falcon 9 was launching with Starlink's direct competition on Monday morning. This is a brand new booster numbered 1091. Interestingly, based on this post from a few months back by John Edwards, the VP of Falcon and Dragon at SpaceX, Booster 1091 is actually intended to become a Falcon Heavy Center Core that is just flying initially as a regular Falcon 9. As far as I can see, this is the first time that SpaceX has ever done things in that order, so that's cool. 24 Kuiper satellites were on board once more, so this brings the total deployed now to 102. A shortfall of gravitas was the landing platform for this one's first catch, and that was some brilliant footage right there. Can you believe that this was already SpaceX's 100th launch of the year, including the 3 Starship ones? Greg Scott was out watching that booster returning, and yes, as he says there, it is quite odd watching a very clean booster floating back in. It almost looks weird seeing one without a heavy soot coating these days. Now, we had some neat Starlink action too, of course. Starlink Group 17-4 was off on Wednesday evening from, you guessed it, Vandenberg. Couldn't see anything more than a vague brightening of the feed there until the onboard camera view kicked in. 24 Starlink satellites on board, and SpaceX again shared another beautiful view of this deployment. This time they continued that footage so that we could see the arms that hold down the stack bounce off the body of the second stage. Got to love those reflective Starlink satellites. Only flight number 5 for booster 1093 on this one, and down onto the drone ship Of Course I Still Love You. That left just the one Group 1020 mission remaining. That came just under 8 hours later on Thursday morning across the country in Florida at Slick 40. That had a much clearer view of liftoff and had a sweet uninterrupted onboard view all the way to stage separation. On board, a set of 28 satellites and another quite young booster 1085 on flight number 10. Just read the instructions was downrange to pick that one up. So yeah, another busy week for Falcon 9, but here is one coming next week that is wild. Between the fairings for the upcoming OTV-8 mission is the X-37B, soon to launch from Florida, so stay tuned for that one. Heading way down to South America, Ariane 6 was back in action again for its third mission. Lifting off from the European spaceport in French Guiana in the early hours of Wednesday morning, this was another spectacular liftoff. The vehicle roared off into the sky with 2 solid rocket boosters attached. A little under 2.5 minutes into flight, the solids were off and away, and Ariane 6 was riding solely on that Vulcain sustainer engine. From here, most of the views switched to animations, and the fairings had separated. Now, this mission's payload was the METOP SG-A1, the first in a series of 6 satellites for ESA. These weather satellites aim to massively improve forecasting. It's all to give meteorologists a better ability to issue earlier warnings for storms, heat waves, and other natural disasters. The core stage kept burning for another 5 minutes before shutting down, separation there, and the upper stage sent off into its target orbit. This was heading into a polar orbit at around 800 kilometers in altitude. With the satellite's 6 instruments on board, it's going to soon begin transmitting high resolution and high quality observations. That data will contain all the information needed to forecast between 12 hours and 10 days ahead. Now, last week as I was exporting our video out to upload, the news about Jim Lovell passing was just about to break, and in an almost bizarre sort of coincidence, a book I ordered weeks before on the Gemini and Mercury missions had just arrived on my doorstep. Now, all through it are the stories of Jim's legendary career along with the other heroic astronauts. Lovell, I think, is such a hero to so many, including myself, and he just made it to 97 years old. That is quite a run. I just can't imagine what it would have been like watching these early missions play out, because obviously I wasn't born yet. Well before the Apollo missions, he was on board 2 of, I think, the most important Gemini missions. His first mission to space in 1965 was on Gemini 7 with Frank Borman. This was no joyride to space. They spent almost 2 full weeks in orbit, crammed into a capsule that was frequently described as being the size of the front half of a Volkswagen Beetle. That mission was a test to see how the human body would cope with extended time in spaceflight, and with a total of 13 days in orbit, that certainly broke the record up to that point. They also made history when the Gemini 6A pulled up beside them within about 1 foot of their spacecraft. There was no docking at this point yet, but the rendezvous proved that you could bring 2 ships in orbit together. Remember that none of this had ever been done before in any space program, so imagine being the first to take all of these risks. This set the stage for what came next, where there were these scenes of the rendezvous and docking with an Agena target vehicle. In 1966, Lovell returned to space on Gemini 12 with Buzz Aldrin. The big focus there was spacewalking, which had been a big challenge for earlier crews. I must admit, flicking through all these incredible firsts had me feeling pretty emotional. That's Lovell right there. Absolutely beautiful Gemini and Mercury Remastered book, this one. Revisiting what they did back in the 60s is just so crazy to think about. Lovell then went on to become a member of the Apollo 8 crew. They were, of course, the first humans to ever see the far side of the moon.
What I keep imagining is if I'm some lonely traveler from another planet, whether I would land on the blue or the brown part of the Earth. You better hope we land in the blue part.
Just a few years later, he was launched along with the Apollo 13 crew, and, well, we all know that story very well. Obviously, that crew were planning to walk on the moon in the 3rd ever mission to the surface, but of course, that did not happen. Instead, those famous words that Lovell repeated redefined the entire flight.
This is Houston. Say again, please.
Houston, we've had a problem.
Okay, stand by at 13. We're looking at it.
Looking out the window, the crew could see a plume of gas venting into space. One oxygen tank was already empty and the other was quickly dropping. They were in such colossal danger, but against all the odds, Lovell, Fred Hayes and Jack Swikart made it back home safely. Prior to the Skylab flights that followed, Lovell's total time in space from his 4 space flights was a record, standing at 715 hours, 5 minutes and 30 seconds. What an incredible legacy left behind as we continue dreaming for a future pushing these boundaries again. Thank you, Jim. So it's worth remembering that Launch Complex 14 at Cape Canaveral Space Force Station played a super crucial role in those Mercury and Gemini era missions in the 50s and 60s. In fact, Lovell's Gemini 12 mission included a docking exercise with a separate Agena target vehicle launched separately. Well, it was that vehicle that was the last to have flown from Launch Complex 14. It has been sitting there without any more flight activity since 1966. Well, not for much longer. Stoke Space has been busy over the past year upgrading Launch Complex 14 to prepare for their Nova rocket, and you can clearly see that a lot has changed since last year. The entire area of land has been elevated and reshaped now, and they just installed underground utilities such as power, data, water, and even more. They're even building a horizontal integration facility that can house multiple rockets at once. Stoke have also just shared a bunch of their work with vehicle components shipped from their manufacturing unit in Washington, all being assembled to prepare for launch. Now, the pad itself has the rocket's launch mount well underway, and the flame trench is also coming into form nicely. Stoke Space has an upgraded version of the first stage Zenith engine ready, and the second stage is undergoing structural testing. So with all of the progress, Stoke Space is hoping to get Launch Complex 14 active by next year and hopefully a successful maiden flight of Nova to go with it. So that is it for the week, my friends. I hope you enjoyed this video. Super appreciate you being here every week. I know how valuable your time is, so I'm grateful that you spend it here subscribed with me. If you want to continue with more space goodness, check out this video here next, or maybe these videos. Thanks for watching all this way through. As always, I will see you all in the next video.
The vast loneliness up here on the moon is awe-inspiring, and it makes you realize just what you have back there on Earth.